Oftentimes people tell me that the Bible is a history book, and it is a history of African history at that. So let's compare the Bible to history and one major incident, one major issue that is one of the things that caused me to walk away from Christianity in itself. And that is the birth of Christ, the birth of the character Yeshua. There are too many contradictions and confusions that do not match actual history concerning this birth. Now, the Romans kept incredible records because they were running an empire. In running an empire, you have to keep incredible records of accounting, especially when it comes to money, and as far as who's in leadership for different time frames or in different locations. So with all of Israel being a vassal state of Rome, broken up into multiple parts, you had multiple leaders, rulers who were puppets of the Roman Empire. We know them mostly by the name of Herod. But what you have to understand that there are multiple Herods that are spoken of in your Bible, and when you understand the different Herods, you can understand the different areas to which they reign over and what their responsibilities were. Now, one of the first things that we have to look at is the fact that according to your Bible in Matthew and Luke, it talks about the fact that Joseph and Mary had to go to the birthplace of their ancestors in order to be counted in a census, and that is where we get the narrative of them journeying to Bethlehem to have the baby Jesus, and there was no place in the inn, which is actually a family home, not a hotel. The problem with that is that there is absolutely zero references to a census being taken in all of Israel. The only place that a census was taken, and according to one of the stories, the story of Matthew, it said a taxation of the entire world. There is zero instances of a census done in all of Rome. But yet there was a census done by Quirinius in 6 CE in Judea, to which this would be the only census that had taken place. But this census did not require people to return to their ancestral home, but only requiring of those people living in Judea for taxable property. The issue here is that Joseph and Mary lived in Galilee. This is a different region. This region was not under the taxation, or nor were they under this so-called census. So when Quirinius came in 6 BCE, he came to take a census, but Joseph was not required to be there. But according to your Bible, he would have been required to be there. The other problem with the taxation and this census being in 6 BCE as to why, and at that time, at 6 BCE, that is because it was Judea that was ran by Herod Archelaus. I'm probably saying his name wrong. And he was disposed of by the Roman emperor in 6 BCE. When he was disposed of, that's when this occurred. The census occurred, and then you had the situation of a revolt happening because the Jewish people of that day, already not liking Rome because they wanted them to put a statue of Caesar in their temple and give homage to it once a year. But according to Psalms, the Jewish people, it was against their rules in order for them to have a census taken. This is also something that you can find in Exodus as well, where taking a census, unless God prescribes it, is not something that the Jewish people would avail themselves to. And in this sense, Joseph would not have availed himself to a census, especially this census was one that wasn't even in the realm to which they lived. Now here's some of the other issues that go with this. According to these stories, especially in Luke, he was told that you must flee to Egypt because Herod, King Herod I, or Herod the Great, had issued a decree saying that all the children under the age of 2 are to be killed, murdered, in order to prevent this king from being born. Well, this would have happened prior to 1 BCE or within the time frame of 1 to 4 BCE, since between 1 to 4 BCE is the time frame that they say that Herod died. It could not have happened after 4 BCE because Herod the Great would have been dead, and that would have been a different Herod who was over the empire at that time frame, over the vassal state of Judea at that time frame. Also, if this had happened, Mary and Joseph most likely would have been in Galilee and not in Judea, so therefore it would not have affected them anyway. But according to your story, they were in this town. They were in Bethlehem. They were in Jerusalem. This is where the area of Judea composes of. But since he would have been dead at 4 BCE, which your story does say that after they were in Egypt, they were awakened by another angel and told they can go back to Galilee now that Herod had died. But what would it matter for them to go back to Galilee if the Herod that they were afraid of was the Herod that was in Judea, a totally different place? Fire truck going by. So the Herod that they would have been afraid of at that time frame would have been Herod Agrippa, because Herod Agrippa was the one who was in charge of Galilee at that time frame. But it couldn't have been at his death that they were afraid that they were able to return, because Herod Agrippa didn't die to 39 BCE, which would mean that this Jesus character would not have started his ministry until much, much later, because he would have still been a child at 39 BCE. But according to your story and how we account for history right now, or time, this Jesus character died in 33 BCE. So the numbers would not match, still don't match. So when was Jesus born? Was he born during the time of Herod the First, or was he born during the time of Herod Agrippa? Those are some of the questions that you have to ask that do not match up to history, do not match up to how the land was governed during that time frame. Was he born around 6 BCE or after 6 BCE, after Archelaus had died and was disposed of? He was drowned by the Romans, by the way. Or was he born sooner than that? According to the story, the wise man visited Herod the Great, who is the one over Judea, and died at 4 BCE or 1 BCE. So it could not have been because of a census, because the census wasn't taken until 6 BCE. This is why the book that people give their life over to, this deity that people give their life over to in Jesus Christ, could not have been a historical creature, because none of the stories of his birth actually matches up with what we know of history. Because we also have coins of Herod Agrippa, we have coins of Herod the Great, we have coins of Caesar Augustus. We have other archaeological evidence that demonstrate that those people most likely existed during the time frame that we say that they exist. That in concert with different types of literature, as far as laws being sent down, decrees being sent down, actions as far as Quirinius conducting his census at the time frame of 6 BCE, new people put in place, those sorts of things. Those are the things that give us more proof of those people existing, and we have zero proof other than your biblical story of Yeshua actually ever existing. And if you cannot get the time frame of his birth right, where did he go after his birth? Because in Matthew, they stayed in Bethlehem for the required 8 days, had him named and baptized. Mary went through her cleansing process, and they returned back to Galilee, according to the Matthew version. But the Luke version has them going to Egypt and fleeing and waiting for Herod the Great to die, which means that they wouldn't have came back to Galilee until 4 BCE. And then one little question. We know that Herod's decree said to kill all the babies that were about 2 years old and younger. According to your biblical story, John was within 2 years of Jesus. Therefore, John should have also died during this time frame. But we know that he lived because, according to this story, Herod Agrippa is the one who bound him, chained him, beat him, and then murdered him. So how did he escape from the infanticide that occurred during Herod the Great? There's nothing about him fleeing. It just makes you wonder. But hey, like I always say, to understand all of this and to know where your path is, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.